Okay, as you approach your opportunity to exercise your freedom of self-expression, you might want to think about a couple of things in terms of preparation for that. So, have with me, you know what? At least the paper version of it. You'll see the computerized version. And I'll make the same offer. If anybody wants to come and take this thing on paper here in person, let me know, and I'll work that out for you. Fewer and fewer people take me up on that offer. Used to, I got about half of the people who did, but lately, actually last time, I don't think anybody did, so that's fine, but still the offer. Okay, so here it is. Again, we'll talk about format first. You know that by now. It's lost count already. Okay, the paper version is 7 pages. There are 33 items. They're going to count equally. I've not weighted those any other way. 33 items. Other stuff format-wise, out of those 33 items, the first 25 are multiple choice. That means the last 7 are short essay, short answer, and you know the routine on that. Nothing should take more than a short paragraph to answer. Don't write me a big, long, nasty essay. You don't want to write it, I don't want to read it. So don't feel like you just get to the point and answer things directly. So I'm not looking for length. I'm looking for that you answer the question. So good for both of us. So that's kind of what the format looks like. In terms of the content, we've done 3 things the second half of the term. We've talked about multivariate analysis of variance, or MANOVA. We've talked about analysis of covariance, or ANCOVA. And we've talked about constructing instruments. So let's kind of deal with those one at a time. What I will ask you to do with those is that I will give you this information, which is part of an output window of SPSS. I just made up some numbers and put in there. If you look at your Green and Salkin book, if you look at page 227 and let's see, where's that? Yeah. And the top of page 228, you've got 2 tables there, multivariate tests, and then the tests of between subject effects. What I will do is I will give you parts of those tables, the parts that you need to answer the questions. And this, well, it's a little bit of a break. You may not see it that way, but on that chart on page 227, there's a lot of stuff you don't need on that table. I'm going to give you the stuff you do need, so you don't have to figure out what you don't need, which is, I think, kind and nice. And likewise, on page 228, the test of between subject effects, there's duplicate information there. And I just give you the part that you need. Well, I give you, if you look at it's the group and error parts. That's the part that you need. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you'll remember things like sentences like this: f of a couple different degrees of freedom equal the f value, and then the p-value equals what? I'm going to ask you to fill in those, what I've put as question marks here. Be able to fill in those things. That's one thing I'll ask you to. I'll probably ask you a question about some other parts of the table. keep in mind that this can be for the overall, this can be for a Wilks Lambda part, and it can also be for each individual variable. For example, you're going to have one of those for on the recall exam and the application exam on the example we're looking at. So you'd have an F equals 2 degrees of freedom, or 2 different kinds of degrees of freedom, an F value, a P value. So there's a couple of sentences like this you need to get out of those output windows. Because keep in mind that a multivariate, it has something to do with the Wilks part, but also then you look at it variable by variable. So I'll ask you to fill in these kinds of blanks, which is what you had to do for the midterm also. Just it was a different procedure. I may ask questions about follow-up analysis, may ask questions about effect size, may ask questions about significance. All those are fair game. Likewise, when we're talking about the analysis of covariance, if you'll look at the top of page 215, you'll see a typical table of an output for analysis of covariance. And so you still need to fill in the same kind of question marks that I just wrote down for you from this kind of table and this kind of procedure. Fair to ask questions about effect size, different variables, and so forth. Fair game to ask questions about levels of significance, and usually that's kind of a no-brainer at 0.05, but you'll remember there are a couple adjustments you have to make in one of these procedures. So know what these two procedures are, how to get the information out of them, how to interpret them, what they mean, that sort of thing. So those are the two statistical procedures we've taught. Any questions about those? Because after we spent a fair amount of time on each of those, we kind of took a little bit of different direction to end up with. Last part of the course dealt with item construction. We talked about operational definitions. We talked about reliability. We talked about validity. We talked about principles for item or instrument construction. So those are the content topics for the item construction part that we spent the last couple of times on. Now you ask questions. Okay, the question had to do with when you're dividing up your level of significance. And that had to do with the multivariate analysis of variance, and you do that twice. Well, depending on what's significant, you may do it up to twice, I should say it that way. The first time you divide it by the number of dependent variables. And if you find significance somewhere, then you divide it by the number of groups. Then you divide, not the 0.05, the 0.05 is divided by the number of dependent variables, and that number is what you need to divide by the number of groups if there's significance at the end there. Are you all at home still writing like crazy also, like you've never heard this before? Yes, that's the MANOVA. Because that's where you have more than one dependent variable. That's what makes it multivariate. Okay, I thought you might be. Other questions? Questions, so we'll just cover the second half. Yeah, I'm not going to ask you questions about the procedures that we did in the first half of the course. Like the two-way ANOVA. I'm not going to ask you about that. So just MANOVA, ANCOVA, and instrument construction. I can get 33 items out of that. Do we need to be able to give examples? Very possibly, which is a euphemistic way of saying yes. I always ask you that. You know some of the things I'm going to ask you because I always do, so I'll just tell you, yeah. They were not in the book or they were not discussed, by the way. And you can't just change vitamin C to vitamin D. And anything else? Okay, so you know what to do in terms of D2L. The question is it going to work or not? Which is two parts. Did I set it up correctly? And even if I did set it up correctly, will it still work correctly? What do you think? What do you think the probability of both those things happening are? If there's nothing else, then we'll go with that. And if you're not ready now, you will be by the time you click onto it, right? Okay. Call me, email me, visit me when you need to. Probably not if, but when. So feel free to do that.